Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Made for More podcast. I am incredibly excited to have a fellow Adelaidean joining me on the show today. Hello and welcome, Nicola. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ali. I am delighted.
Delighted.
But I am delighted.
We were just talking. We were just talking before I hit record. We're actually recording this during SA's, first lockdown of 2021. So pretty nice to see other people on the line. But before we get too far into today's episode, Nicola, I would love if you could share with our listeners a little bit more about where you've come from and where you're going.
Wonderful. I call myself a former pharmacist and a recovering academic, and I'd say now somewhat of a spiritual seeker, I guess has been the trajectory. So I actually started my life as a pharmacist a little bit by default. It wasn't my life dream, but that was the course that I got into after school. So I pursued that, and it served me very well for well over a decade. And I traveled with it. I was able to live and work in the UK for a couple of years using my pharmacy degree as well. But then there was a sense of it wasn't fulfilling enough for me. But back then I wasn't aware of living on purpose, living my values, what my character strengths were. I just had this rumbling sense that it just didn't quite feel right. So when I came back to Australia from the UK, it was like, well, what can I do? And all the advice around me said, you cannot throw away your pharmacy degree. So I didn't. I was starting to look outside to go, what else could I do? What else was I sort of passionate about at school? What else could I do? And the circle around me, brought me back in. Fortunately, unfortunately, I tend to think unfortunately more at the time, to say you have to still use your degree. So I ended up in the pharmaceutical industry and ended up as a national training manager for 2 multinational pharmaceutical companies. And then I started to find my groove a little bit, because that was in teaching, training, mentoring, coaching, doing training for the reps. So did that for a number of years, but that was corporate life in Sydney. And if anybody knows corporate life in Sydney, you're either made for it or you're not. I don't even know that anybody's actually made for it, but I was on a road to burnout. So we removed myself from that situation and sort of went adrift a bit again, and then thought, what else? What else? And for some reason, I thought academia. I thought, I'm going to be a lecturer. So it took me about 18 months to talk to people and find an opportunity. And I was approached through my network to say, there's a new pharmacy school. I was living on the Gold Coast at the time, and they had this 6-week project. We had students going out on placements with no program for them. Could you design a program for the students, for the pharmacists, which were called preceptors? And I just did yes, of course I can. And then go home and go, holy hell, what does that mean? How do I do that? Figured it out, went well. So ended up becoming a lecturer over a number of years, started, doing contract work, and eventually got a full-time permanent academic position.
Amazing.
Which was amazing at the time. And over time, it started to suck the soul out of me, that particular role. There's a lot of good things about being an academic, and there was a lot of pressures. And because I came in through the side door, I was a professional. There's a real hierarchy between those that have got PhDs and an academic research profile, and those of us that don't.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a definite us and them, and it got to the point where I had reached as far as I was going to be able to be promoted to and have influence without getting a PhD, having a research track. And I loved the teaching.
Yep.
That was my area. And my area within teaching had niched down to communication.
I was going to say, what did you end up lecturing and teaching on? But it was communication.
It was communication, and underpinning that was listening. So was
that communication? Sorry, was that communication for pharmacists or communication more broadly?
It was a communication course designed for pharmacy students when they became pharmacists.
Wow.
So it was health-based communication, patient-centered care approach, active listening approaches. But I managed to sneak in some reflective practice, mindfulness as well, to introduce the students, because I had that point had started on a mindfulness journey, and to be able to regulate yourself and be present, for two things. To be able to regulate yourself. So if you get triggered by a patient or a situation and you need to function, you need a tool which is going to calm you back down, which mindfulness can do. And also to be present with patients. They weren't listening. They were appalling listeners, and fundamental to that is presence. You have to be in the room, but in the room up here, and in your body,
Yeah. Yep. So mind, heart, and soul.
Yeah. And then around 2013, 14, I decided that this was not where I wanted to be. I was feeling more and more pressure to follow a particular path, which I just knew was not going to be right for me. So I ended up quitting, which everybody thought was nuts. It's like, you've got a permanent academic position. There was lecturers in my school that was all they wanted.
Yeah.
And I'm going, no, this isn't for me.
Yeah.
So I quit. And you had to give 6 months notice. You had to give a semester notice.
Wow, that's a lot, isn't it? Talk about forward planning.
6 months. Yeah. And then I did some travel.
Yep.
And landed back in Adelaide to visit with no intention of staying. It was just a stopping off point. And that was 2014.
So how many countries did you end up traveling to?
In that one, it was in Southeast Asia.
Yep.
So not many.
Yep.
I have traveled. I've lived overseas and traveled and done a whole lot of intrepid travel adventure tours when I was sort of in my 40s, actually.
Right.
I did. So been to places like Borneo and Morocco and Peru and Bolivia.
Oh, amazing.
So as well as Europe. And so I've traveled a lot.
Yeah.
And as a sideline, very grateful that I had that opportunity when I did.
Yeah.
You look at the way the world's changed now.
Yeah. How are your itchy feet going?
Yeah. But I ended up back in Adelaide and with another existential crisis of who am I and what am I going to do now?
Yep.
And was looking at career changes or life changes. And I guess in a more sort of conservative way, when you're looking for a career change, I was also looking for a life change. At that time, I put career change and life change together.
Yep.
And I applied for and got accepted into a master's in applied positive psychology.
So you carried on with the study.
So I carried on with study, but in a completely different path, and launched a business at the same time.
At the same time? I didn't realize you did it at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, you may as well go hard or go home, hey?
Well, hindsight is a wonderful thing.
So let's talk a little bit now around your business. So what do you focus on mostly? I know you work mostly with organizations and their leaders, but what's your, we did talk about this before I hit record, but what's your main focus and what are you hoping to be able to impart with the people that you work with?
I think to distill it down, it's teaching leaders to lead from the inside out.
Oh, love it.
Yeah. So it's HeartWise is what I call it, HeartWise leadership.
Yep.
So being able to access the wisdom of the heart, which
Oh.
includes the intuition and insight that we get from our heart and an embodied way of being and living, as well as the heart-based qualities, living with courage, showing up with compassion, the qualities of care, the C's. They seem to all be C's.
Yeah, they
Connection, collaboration, co-creation.
Yeah.
So it is very much about leading with the heart, connecting with the heart and having a heart-based approach, whereas leadership traditionally is very cognitive and head-based. And we don't want to dismiss that. Strategy is needed, but we need a complete flip and a paradigm shift in the way that we're dealing with people and the planet. We need to care more. We need to love more, honestly,
Yeah.
That's what it fundamentally comes down to. And it comes from turning inwards and becoming self-aware and really looking at your inner landscape and how you show up in the world for yourself first and foremost, and then for others. And it kind of ripples out from that. So that's kind of that's my philosophy, I guess.
Yeah.
How does it actually show up in practice in organizations? Is I have leadership programs. One is HeartWise leadership. I've got a balance program, which is being fit for leadership and fit for life, which is very much around well-being, self-care, mindfulness. I run programs on emotional intelligence and programs on presence and powerful listening, presence and powerful speaking.
Lovely. So for some of our listeners who are listening today and they're wondering, what is HeartWise or what does that, look like? You said you need strategy and it's lovely to practice mindfulness, but in terms of actually leading people or leading an organization, how does HeartWise fit into that? Or it's behaving in a HeartWise way?
Behaving in a HeartWise way, if you think about it as tapping into the emotional intelligence field. So instead of just using your IQ, you're using your EQ. So from a heart-based perspective, we really are being present with people. It's how you listen to people. So there's strategies on, it's very different if you listen from a head or a heart base to people, on how you connect and the information that you receive as well. So there'll be a lot around listening. There's a lot around mindfulness and presence. What does that mean? What does it mean to be present? And a lot around emotions and connection. As human beings, we're wired for connection. So a HeartWise leader understands and truly puts people first and works to connect with their team and value them for who they are as people, not for their role and what they can do, so that they really create that safe space and sense of belonging for their teams.
I think that now more than ever, that's really prevalent, certainly in the last 12 months, that connection and, just checking in with your team to see how they're going, not just like how's your project going or how's your workflow going, but how are you actually going, what's been happening for you. And I've certainly noticed a shift in the last probably 18 months that's happened with a lot of the people that I work with. And I think it's awesome. I think it's probably just accelerated the rate that we need to be more compassionate and we need to be more caring and we need to be more courageous to be able to lean into those difficult situations. You mentioned
and authenticity is, I'm a big fan of Brene Brown's and the power of vulnerability and braving the wilderness. So I think the leaders that we need are those that will brave the wilderness.
And perhaps even take a different path.
And we need that. And there's people out there. And I actually love her analogy of, you have to be brave enough to be true to yourself, to be alone and wander into the forest and all the dark.
Yeah.
And then when you're there, you suddenly realize, oh my God, there's others here. This is where my tribe is. But it takes a real act of courage to do that.
Yeah.
And we need that in leaders. We need leaders to show up as themselves as well and really start carving a whole new way forward, not necessarily subscribing to any one model per se.
Yep.
I mean, I've got a title, HeartWise, because people like things to hang on to.
Yep. Yeah.
But it really is about shifting the way of being and showing up is fundamentally what it's about.
Yeah. I love that. You mentioned about mindfulness as well. And I think mindfulness is one of those things that's been around for, since the beginning of time, but it's getting a lot more, I guess, mainstream these days as well. You can pick up a mindfulness journal pretty much anywhere. Do you remember, you mentioned how you started getting into mindfulness and that's when your journey started. Do you remember that first moment that sparked your interest in mindfulness?
It came with yoga.
Tell me more about that.
And I don't actually practice yoga. However, I have at times done various yoga retreats and courses and, done it for a year or two. And it was the incorporation of doing meditations in that, which was my first kind of gateway to see where it was. Is it Shavasana when you're on the floor?
Yeah, that's my favorite, when you're just laying flat. Yeah.
When you're just laying flat and having a yoga teacher really doing a guided meditation and feeling into the body and the breath work. And so, and I was on the Gold Coast. Then I actually went looking. I went looking for Buddhist temples and what was being offered, and started to go to some half day, introduction to meditation and mindfulness. And it's just continued. And I've, before shutdown, I was with a friend. We went regularly to Buddha House here and would do mindfulness meditations on a Monday night in the group.
Oh, lovely.
So
is that something that you practice daily now?
I do.
Yeah.
I don't have a formal practice that I do every single day. So I'm not regimented in my practice as a formal practice. Sometimes I do. Yesterday I did a 15-minute meditation, which was a very formal seated practice.
Yeah.
I probably fall into the camp of really wanting to lead a present mindful life. So it's constantly coming back to, am I in my head or am I actually experiencing what I'm experiencing in the moment, and being with it and noticing my thoughts, noticing when I'm getting caught in my thoughts, to come out of them, to come back to presence. I'm doing this internally constantly with you. I'm in an interview. Has my mind hooked somewhere else? No. If it does, it's that, I'm starting to worry or think about what is Ali thinking of me? Did I answer that question well enough? You become aware of the internal dialogue and go, mindfulness is awareness. No, come back.
Yeah.
Come back to the body, come back to the present moment. And I do that constantly.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a practice, isn't it? So you don't ever just, one and done and all of a sudden you're a master. It's one of those continual things that you continually, trying to get back to center. Yeah.
Come back to the center. And of course, there's little tools and techniques that help. And I have little rituals that I have in my day.
Yeah.
So drinking water, I drink mindfully. If I've got water in a glass, it's a cue for me. So I will drink it mindfully. I don't just gulp it down without noticing. I actually take the time. Cups of tea are like that. Cleaning my teeth is a mindfulness activity. You know, there's certain things that you do, and it's training your brain and attention to do that.
Yep.
And there's lots
I do that with cups of tea as well as my, you know, self-care. Make sure that I have a hot cup of tea and I savor it, and it doesn't need to get microwaved. And it's my 5 minutes of alone time where it's just me and my tea, and it's lovely.
It is. Do you have a favorite flavor?
Yes, I love peppermint tea. A bit vanilla, but love me a peppermint tea.
Yes, I've got a nice peppermint tea at the moment. Yeah, I like the blends as well.
What's your favorite?
I think it's called I'm not going to pronounce this, Puka or Pucka brand.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And at the moment, I'm alternating between Renew and Cleanse.
Oh, sounds like a good combination.
Fennel and cardamom and peppermint and that sort of kind of combinations.
Delicious.
They are.
So I've noticed on your LinkedIn, you do a Fridays mindful moments. How did that come to be?
That's my favorite sort of passion project, which is growing the mindful moments. It started in March 2020.
Ah, right.
So
when all good things started, I think.
When all good things started, and everybody was, and the huge word at the time was, we have to pivot. We have to pivot our business online, and we have to pivot, and we have to start reaching out to everybody and letting everybody know, because I'm in the training speaking business now with my businesses. It's what I do.
Yeah.
Everybody is saying you have to contact every single one of your clients, and you have to have a discussion with them about how you're going to get your programs into their organization online. And it just felt icky. It did not sit with me well. It felt very disingenuous. And so I was sitting back thinking, but I want to be doing something to help. But what would I genuinely want to do? I don't want to be doing something so that I can be seen to be doing something or seen to be offering benefit, which is what I felt some people had fallen into, that kind of trap. They're only doing it so that they can be seen to be doing it. So I really wanted to come from the heart, you know, what did I want? And I love taking photographs. I love quotes and poetry. So I kind of put the two together, and I only started with a couple of friends. I said, hey, I sent a little mindful moment message to a couple of people saying, hey, you know, I hope everything's okay. You know, take a couple of breaths. This too shall pass, kind of hopeful message, and said, would you like something like this? I'm thinking, I've got this idea. Would it be helpful if you just got a couple of little messages, you know, during the week? And they said, yes.
Yep.
And it grew from there. It started with friends to go, hey, I'm doing this. And if I was chatting to somebody and people are talking about, what have you done today? And I said, well, I've just done this and I've sent it out to 6 people. Did you want to join the list?
Yeah.
Then somebody said, you should put it on LinkedIn. And I went, oh, that's, I'm just doing this because I want to.
Yeah.
Then I put it on LinkedIn, and, you know, it has grown. And what happens now is when I'm in organizations and we, as part of nearly all my workshops, I will invite people. I explain what it is. And I say it's a mindful moment campaign with images of street art, nature. It's bringing you into the moment. But I said it's quite poetic. It's spiritually based or spiritually aligned, if you're okay with that, and get their phone numbers. And it's just growing. So
fantastic.
And I love doing it, and get the little comments back from people. It seems to hit the mark for people.
Yeah.
So it's one of my contributions to the world.
It's a lovely contribution. I love the idea of a mindful moment campaign. So if people do want to join your campaign, can they just find you on LinkedIn?
They can find me on LinkedIn. If they're in Australia, that's okay. At the moment, I can still do it all through my iPhone. Yep. And I'm at the moment looking at how I can expand that, because I didn't do it with any intention other than I just want to help the people around me. And now it's got to a point where I have to start thinking about how I might be able to, what's the word?
Scale.
That's the word. That's how I can, and scale it. But it still has to be personalized. That's the whole point, is that human connection and letting people know.
Yeah. I love that. So what would be your top tips for any of our listeners or leaders that are looking to be a little bit more HeartWise?
I think presence is one of them. You have to cultivate that personal presence, and it's a lifelong journey, really. Every time you think, I've kind of got this nailed and I'm fully here.
Yeah.
The next year comes along and you just continue to practice and practice, and you go, I wasn't there, but I'm there now. And the next year comes along and you go, there's layers and levels that you can become just so much more totally in the moment. And if anybody has had any exposure to somebody like the Dalai Lama, his presence is phenomenal. You can feel the energy of his presence. It's so powerful. The more present we are as a leader, which is grounded, centered in your body, not distracted, your thoughts are as much as possible aligned with whatever is going on in the moment, the greater the connection, the greater the sense of relational trust, the greater the loyalty and influence you have. It really is a powerful skill, I think, for leaders. And I think then it's trusting the heart. So that intuition. And if you read people like Oprah Winfrey or Richard Branson, they will attest to intuition being a huge part of their success.
Yeah.
That's one of their guiding principles, that they will actually stop and take the time and not just strategize, but actually fall back and think about, well, it's not thinking actually, it's feeling into what is the right decision here, or where can I go? So being able to actually acknowledge that intuition is powerful, it's valid, it's been, scientifically validated these days, and to be able to cultivate that, to trust your own path with that.
Yeah.
And I think then a third one which connects with both of those is the power of listening, truly, truly holding space. And when we're chatting before, you said you know of Oscar Trimboli and deep listening.
Yes.
Tracy Rubel runs Sidewalk Talk in the United States, doing amazing stuff with listening as well. And Jane Adstead Grant in the UK is doing amazing stuff with listening to create spaces for people to think. And that's
like physical spaces.
No, well, I think they're in lockdown at the moment, so I think it's all online. But there are different levels of listening and different types of listening. So I talk about powerful listening, which is a very heart-based listening to build connection. Oscar talks about deep listening, the deep level of listening, a whole body listening. Jane talks about generative listening, which is they're all interconnected and very similar. Generative listening is creating the space so people can think themselves.
I haven't heard of that before. I love it. I have to research. Jane.
Yeah. I'll send you a invite link on LinkedIn with her as.
That'd be great. We'll put the links to what you're talking about there in the show notes as well.
Yeah. But powerful listening is it's actually based on the Chinese character Ting, which is the Chinese character for listening, and it translates loosely as I give you my ears. my eyes, my undivided attention, and my heart.
Oh, wow. That's lovely.
So it really is, we need the ears to understand words, vocalics, tone, non-verbals, we're looking, but it's also about, seeing and looking. Are you really seeing that person in front of you?
Mm-hmm.
And then the presence, the attention, and the heart is that deeper level of actually dropping down into the heart space, or using, you've got a heart space, there's a brain in your heart, we have a cardiac brain.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't care if you want to think about it as I'm intellectually dropping down to another brain, or on that spiritual level of opening up the heart chakra and the heart space.
Right.
We actually can listen very differently from that space. And that is where you get that true resonance that occurs with people, where you start to really sync up with people, and it can occur with people that you know really, really well. But have you ever had that experience back in the day when we could, say, be on a plane, where you're sitting next to somebody and for some reason you just have this amazing conversation and you feel like you've known them your whole life?
Yeah.
You've both probably unconsciously just been totally present and in that embodied heart space to make that connection.
Oh, that's lovely. I have to think about that next time I meet someone where I'm like, oh, feel like we've known each other for ages. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Nicola. It's been amazing chatting with you. I'll pop all the links to how people can get in contact with you in today's show notes. I hope
Brilliant.
you have a beautiful day, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's been delightful. Thanks, Ali.
Thank you.